Hey there, welcome to the sermon preview. I'm glad you're taking a second to join me here today. We are jumping into a new series. We've just wrapped up our Lent series, our Easter series called 7, where we looked at the seven miracles or signs that were recorded in the Gospel of John that Jesus did. And it culminated in what we experienced on Sunday, the resurrection of Jesus and the new life and the glory that God gets through all of that. It was just wonderful, a great Sunday of celebration with many of our brothers and sisters in Christ. It was a wonderful, wonderful service that we had. And so thank you for those of you that were a part of that helped with that participated in that. It was a wonderful Sunday. But now, in this week, we're moving into a new series, and we're going to be looking at a 10-week series in the letter to the Colossians. So the book of Colossians. Colossians is one of those somewhat smaller books near the end of your New Testament. It's after Philippians and then Colossians, right? And we're calling this series Greater Than because it's this idea that Jesus is greater than anything else. Greater than everything, anything in the world. Anything the world has to offer or the hardships that we face, anything, Jesus is greater than that. We oftentimes, we might use the word preeminence. Jesus has preeminence over everything else. And this is the idea that Jesus, his greatness surpasses all other things. So Jesus is greater than anything else. And so this week we're going to be jumping into the first week of this in chapter 1. And as we look at the book of Colossians, the letter of Colossians from Paul that he writes, we see like the first 2 chapters are kind of describing the greatness of Jesus. Why is Jesus greater than everything else? And then the last 2 chapters are describing how we should live if the first 2 chapters are true. So if chapters 1 and 2 are true about Jesus, then we obviously need to live as chapters 3 and 4 describe for us to live. So we see the way that this letter flows is Jesus is great, he's greater than everything else, and because of that, we should live in this way. So I'm really excited. So this week we're jumping into Chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. 1 through 14, and this is kind of the intro into this letter. We see Paul, he greets the Colossians, the church in Colossae, and he greets them, and then he goes into this idea that the gospel is bearing fruit. The words of the gospel are bearing fruit. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes this idea of bearing fruit is kind of a strange one for us to understand because we as humans, we don't bear fruit, but yet we're called to bear fruit, the fruit of the gospel. And so it's an interesting way to look at it from Paul of the gospel is bearing fruit. The gospel is bearing fruit, but it's increasing, right? We see throughout this entire passage here that Paul talks about how the gospel is increasing and he's commending the Colossians for the work that they're doing, and he's laying out these great things that he's heard and that he's seen from this church. And then the last part of this passage is talking about how Paul is praying for the church in Colossae. The different ways, he lays out the different ways that he's been praying for them. So we see how the gospel has been bearing fruit and how it's been increasing and how Paul has been praying for this group of people, for this church in Colossae to continue to do the work of the gospel. And so I want to encourage you to read this passage, verses 1 through 14. We're jumping into this new series called Greater Than. And so read this passage, verses 1 through 14 of the first chapter, and think about the idea of how has the gospel bared fruit in your life? How have you seen the fruit of the gospel affect your life? And how have you seen it in the lives of people around you, whether in Shore Church or our community or your family? How has the gospel bared fruit in their lives? Because we see as the gospel increases and bears fruit, it has an effect on people. It's a powerful thing. The gospel of Jesus is a powerful thing. And so how have you seen that power at work? So I'm excited for Sunday. It's always exciting to dive into a new series and to see what God has in store for us through this new book of the Bible that we're looking at in Colossians, this letter that Paul writes to them, as we try to understand what is Paul trying to tell this original audience and how does that affect us and how can we apply it to our lives here today. So hope to see you 9:15 Sunday morning. Take care.